Hello, I am Peter Okwache. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. It's 1 year in office for Ethiopia's Prime Minister. Has he been able to deliver on reforms like the independence of the judiciary?
We haven't seen any semblance of interference from any part of the executive or even the legislative so far.
Despite all of Prime Minister Abiy's reforms, he struggled to contain ethnic tensions that have displaced nearly 2 million people across the country. The women in Madagascar helping each other to fight fistula, a life-changing condition caused by prolonged labor. Also on the program, peddling their wares. We meet the chocolate makers getting on their bike to turn beans into bars in Ivory Coast.
The bicycle grinder is an opportunity for us to put our environmentally friendly philosophy into practice.
And in sport, Fulham, with their host of African players, are in a battle for Premier League survival tonight. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is today marking 1 year in office. During this time, Mr. Abiy has brought in unprecedented and much lauded political and economic reforms. He's freed political prisoners, welcomed back previously outlawed armed groups, and promised to open up the economy. He's also vowed to restore confidence in government institutions, including the judiciary. Well, Ethiopia's Chief Justice, Meaza Ashanafi, has been speaking to the BBC's Emmanuel Igunza.
We haven't seen any semblance of interference from any part of the executive or even the legislative so far. And that this is not establishing an independent judiciary is going to be a transition for Ethiopia. It doesn't only transform our recent history, but it transforms our entire justice sector administration history.
Yeah. When you talk about the history, there is still a lot to do in terms of making sure that Ethiopians again have that confidence in the judiciary.
True. I completely agree with you. Yeah. I agree with you. The central issue will be ensuring the competence of judges, ensuring that we have judges who have integrity. Integrity is a very important component here. But also we have additional challenges in terms of infrastructure. The judiciary has been completely neglected. We don't have infrastructure. Court buildings are very far in between, and there is a huge challenge, as well as establishing system and the quality of support staff that we have, and the fact that the judiciary also was not able to directly negotiate for budget. All that has been an obstacle to build a strong institution. But we're working towards that.
Yeah. But all these reforms that you're undertaking will probably be useless if some of the laws in the country which have been seen as oppressive, the anti-terror proclamation, laws that prohibit media freedom, and laws that prohibit civil society group engagement are still there. Are you happy with the pace of the changes to these laws?
They're working on it, honestly. They're working on it. Legal Reform Council established under the Attorney General's office, composed of very high-level professionals, and most of them, almost all of them, they have full-time work, and they're providing this service on a voluntary basis, but they have also a secretariat. But from what I see from my observation, they are doing a good job, I think. Yeah, because the civil society law is already amended, the anti-terrorism law has progressed, and there was a final consultation recently. They're also working on the media law, and I think we need to give them a little bit of time.
Ethiopia's Chief Justice Meaza Ashanafi speaking to the BBC's Emmanuel Igunza. Well, despite all of Prime Minister Abiy's reforms, he's faced a huge challenge trying to contain ethnic tensions that have displaced nearly 2 million people across the country. Emmanuel Igunza reports.
Here in southern Ethiopia, tens of thousands of people have been living in squalid makeshift camps. The situation is desperate. Over the past 8 months, families have been stuck with very little food, without access to proper shelter or medical attention. Etenesh Abebe gave birth as she fled her home 3 months ago after a fresh round of conflict erupted between the Oromos and ethnic Gedeos. She says she and her baby are lucky to be alive.
When I gave birth, it was very difficult. Armed men were chasing us and I was bleeding heavily. My husband was with me and we had to stop the bleeding using my clothes. It's been really difficult living here with my child under these conditions.
The violence witnessed across the country stems from decades-old border conflicts, competition for limited pasture for animals, and new rivalries that have erupted since Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came into power. Abiy's government has come under heavy criticism for how it's treated the displacement crisis in the country. He's only visited one camp in southern Ethiopia after massive public outcry. But despite his assurance that all left homeless will be resettled, not many are convinced. Some are actually opposed to proposals to return to their homes without a guarantee of their safety. This is Fikri Asai. She fled her home after heavily armed men from a rival tribe attacked her village, killing dozens and injuring more. Her husband has been missing ever since.
It is very hard to live here with children. Back home, we could provide our children with everything they needed. But now we are not able to do so. Living in a camp is miserable. We can't go back to our previous homes. How can you live with someone who has killed their own brother?
Well, meetings such as this one between the government and those displaced are being replicated elsewhere in the east and in the north of Ethiopia, where thousands have been displaced by ethnic conflict. The aim is to bring down the tensions in order to allow people to go back to their lives. In March, the government postponed for the second time a national population census that was scheduled for this month. It cited the displacement of so many Ethiopians as a reason. Analysts say the Prime Minister has a lot to learn from the crisis.
You can hold where it can work. You can put off, as we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago in Afar area, in Somali area. You know, it gives you another vista, another horizon of thinking.
The Prime Minister has, however, dismissed criticism against him, saying much needed humanitarian assistance was already being distributed to the affected as resettlement plans continue. But for those still stuck in camps like this one, the words will be of little comfort as uncertainty about their future continues. Emmanuel Igunza, BBC News, Northwestern Ethiopia.
Well, let's get more on that story now. Ahmed Soliman is a senior researcher from the Africa program at Chatham House. And we've sat, looking at it from outside and marveled at the pace of reforms in Ethiopia. But what's his scorecard within the country?
I think, it's around 50-50, maybe 60-40. I mean, people remain positive about the trajectory of Ethiopia. But, a year in is not a long time, but people are anxious. They're hungry for a reform process once it's started. And as spaces open up, those demands for reform get greater and greater. And as we've seen with your piece, there's so many challenges, particularly the IDP situation, which, is worse than Syria and the DRC last year. If you put it into context, 1.5 million people displaced in 2018 alone. The tensions between the bordering regions, the Oromia region, Somalia, the Tigray region and Amhara. There are a lot of contentious issues and, a real kind of need for reconciliation, which he's
how
been
does
promoting.
He handle that? Because these are, age-long splits, generations long. How does he handle that? Is it possible to reconcile all these parts?
Well, there needs to be a new political bargain, and I think that's something that we're seeing emerging. The kind of ethnic consensus-based politics is reforming, and it'll either renew itself and we'll find a new generation of the party, or it will fragment and we'll see something else emerging with coalitions. There also has to be deliverables, and so the Ethiopian government needs to kind of continue on its history of delivering pro-poor policies for the people of Ethiopia. despite the changes that are taking place politically. And economics is really going to play a huge factor in this, because it's 100 million people. Really, you have 500,000 graduates coming onto the market every year, 2 million people every year looking for jobs in the labour market. So really providing growth, industrialisation, moving forward with these projects with Ethiopia has been doing, will be key to unifying the nation.
What about the capacity of the country? We heard the Chief Justice there saying, you know, you've also got to create the capacity to enforce or to enshrine all these reforms in the country. Does Ethiopia have the capacity?
Capacity is always a challenge. I think Ethiopia has institutions. It needs to strengthen institutions. It needs to rebuild some other institutions like the judiciary, which have been kind of overwritten in recent years and trampled on. So there are certain areas where there need to be key reforms. That will take time, longer than a year, definitely, 5 to 10 years we're talking about. The issue with Ethiopia and the pace of the change, is that Ethiopia really doesn't have time. So it needs to, the Prime Minister and his government need to be delivering and implementing immediately.
Okay, Ahmed, and I know you're writing an essay on this. I can't wait to read it. Ahmed Soliman from Chatham House, thank you very much for joining us. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Police in Ghana have revealed that they arrested a suspect last month in connection with the killing of an undercover reporter in January. Ahmed Hussein Swale was shot dead by gunmen on a motorbike near his home in Accra. He was part of a team of investigators that had exposed corruption in Ghanaian football. Hundreds of Algerian students have marched in the capital, Algiers, once again, demanding the immediate resignation of President Abdelaziz Bouteflika. The latest demonstrations come a day after Mr. Bouteflika announced he would step down by the end of the month. The students also called for the governing elite around the president to step down. And police in Liberia have detained more than 100 people, most of them motorbike taxi operators, for taking part in violent disturbances in the central town of Weala. On Monday, 2 police stations and a magistrate's court were set on fire, allegedly by protesters angered by the murder of a motorcyclist whose body was found last month. Senegal President Macky Sall has today been inaugurated for a second term in office. Mr. Sall took 58% of the vote in February's elections, in which he faced 4 challengers, but he was accused of preventing some of the main rivals from running. The opposition candidates have rejected the results, but say a court challenge would be futile. Today's ceremony was attended by, amongst others, President Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria and Paul Kagame of Rwanda.
En vertu
by virtue of the oath I have just taken, I will be the president of all Senegalese men and women. I reiterate my call for an inclusive dialogue, a constructive and open dialogue, to all the living forces of the country, to all political forces, to economic and social forces.
Aux forces économiques et sociales.
Now, Ivory Coast is the leading global exporter of cocoa, yet it has one of the smallest chocolate markets. But a local producer has taken matters into her own environmentally conscious hands to create her brand. Non-Shoko Mariama Wuri has more on the story.
Cocoa beans ground by foot. This is the daily routine for Dana Umre and her team at the Monshoko factory. It is here that carefully sorted beans are poured into a funnel and transformed into a chocolate paste by a resourceful yet unusual bicycle. With the environment in mind, Monshoko is amongst a handful of local companies contributing to the retail chocolate market in Ivory Coast. This is despite the fact that cocoa, the nation's primary export product, accounted for $5.9 billion of its total export income in 2018.
The bicycle grinder is an opportunity for us to put our environmentally friendly philosophy into practice. We really want to have a minimal impact on the environment by using minimal electricity and by combining it with a little bit of footwork that also makes it a fun process.
Rendant l'activité un petit peu ludique.
According to Umre, Monshoko's unique flavors lie in the fact that the beans are not roasted and have no added additives, which highlights the authentic taste of the raw bean.
We use raw chocolate that enables the cocoa pods to retain its flavors and nutritional values. It's richer in protein, it's richer in antioxidants, and the taste is really different.
The cocoa industry is threatening the environment in several ways, including contribution to deforestation. And environmental campaign groups say that Ivory Coast is at risk of losing all its forest cover by 2034. But organic cocoa beans are difficult to find in Ivory Coast, where the overwhelming majority of farmers use chemicals and insecticides. As a result, organic chocolate is expensive to produce and caters primarily to the European market. A single Monshoko chocolate bar sells for around 1,500 CFA francs, which is about $2.60, a price quite out of reach for most local consumers. But those who have tasted Monshoko say that the attention to detail that comes with the bars is what they like most.
I've been eating Monshoko for a while now. I have tried different flavors from Monshoko, but the one I like the best is the original bar. I like having it with a cup of coffee. I can tell that Monshoko is different from other chocolates, and I prefer Monshoko because I can really taste the cocoa.
Monshoko and other initiatives of the same kind are developing in Ivory Coast, but they represent a niche market of only 5,000 tons of beans per year in a country that produces over 2 million tons every year.
Don't we all just love chocolate? This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okoche. Still to come, Mimi with all the sports. It's another story from Ivory Coast as we look at efforts being made to grow basketball in the country despite financial challenges. I'm Peter Okoche. The top stories this hour. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is today marking 1 year in office. Mr. Abiy quickly set about introducing unprecedented political and economic reforms. And a swearing-in ceremony has been taking place in Senegal for President Macky Sall, who won a second term in office in February's elections. Now, let's meet the women on the island nation of Madagascar who have had life-changing surgery for obstetric fistula, a condition caused by prolonged labor in childbirth. They now travel to remote villages to help others who need similar treatment, using their power of their own stories to persuade others to get free medical help. The BBC's Victoria Owahunda reports.
A few weeks ago, this group of friends thought that they would spend the rest of their lives alone and rejected because of a taboo condition called obstetric fistula. It's caused by lengthy traumatic labor without any medical assistance.
I endured pain and labor for 3 days. I was rejected by some members of my family, and that made me sad.
This condition often leaves women continually leaking urine and sometimes feces from their vagina. According to the UN, about 2 million women across the world are affected, but less than 20,000 women get treatment each year. However, for many women in remote villages in eastern Madagascar, far away from hospitals, it's been an uphill climb to get them to the clinics.
The main reason many women don't go to the hospitals is because they say they are scared of the surgery. There are also rumors about organ trafficking.
This young woman lost her baby a month ago. She's now living with fistula and says her husband also left her. The journey to the nearest clinic will take days, mainly on foot.
It's a disease of poor women in poor countries. Over 99% of the time the baby dies and the mother is then left with a fistula. Sometimes they get severe injuries to the birth canal, so after the surgery, if they've been completely cured, they should be able to reintegrate normally into society.
For many women like Felicia and Marianne, life has taken a turn they hadn't dared to hope or dream for. Now, they vow to continue helping each other and others who face the same fate. Victoria Owahunda, BBC News.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. And Mimi, you're actually looking at baseball, not basketball in Ivory Coast, right?
Indeed, but it happens baseball, basketball, don't worry. We begin in the English Premier League, where Fulham, who have a host of African players with the likes of Ivory Coast Jean-Michel Seri and Cameroon's Andre Frank Zambo Anguissa, could get relegated. That's if they lose today away at Watford. The club spent $130 million before the start of the season, and they've changed managers twice in this campaign. Claudio Ranieri left his post at the end of February. Caretaker manager Scott Parker spoke ahead of the game about their battle for survival and injuries.
Siri's back, so 2 good days of training along with Tim Ream, so they'll both come back into contention. So yeah, that's where we are really. It's vitally important. I think, like you say, the scenario is what it is. It's a massive game for us to not be relegated tomorrow night. And I think taking a side of that, obviously at this present moment in time, the team and the football club and everyone associated needs a win really. So I think we realise that performances have been progressively got better.
And there's also another match kicking off in a bit. Wolves will be hosting Manchester United. They beat United 2-1 in their FA Cup quarter-final tie in March. They're coming into this game 7th in the table and on the back of a 2-0 defeat by Burnley. For United, who are 5th, they beat Watford at home over the weekend. And baseball was first played in Ivory Coast in 1996 when the president of the country's Baseball and Softball Federation, Ngessa Ntienem, fell in love with the sport whilst in the U.S. There are now professional leagues, and the national Ivorian team are hoping that things will get better in the future. BBC Sport Africa has been to meet the team.
Usually, if we want to evolve and play at an international level, we have to play with other teams. In Ghana and Burkina, they are supported by their government. It is true we have a lot of kids interested in the sports here. They come, they play, but when we don't have competitions, when we don't have funds, when there aren't enough championships, when there is nothing, they lose interest.
We don't have a proper field. As a result, we are not in the best shape we can be. It will be a huge help so that we could train under good conditions.
There are no sponsors, there is no support, and inevitably it makes things difficult when we are the only ones supporting our national sport. We have a lot of potential in Ivory Coast. Ivorians are vivacious, we are fast, we are tenacious. With more support and better resources, I think when the elephant starts to take steps, the ground will tremble and its presence will be known.
And that's all the sport. Peter, you want to know something about me? I was picked actually to represent Nigeria to play softball in the US, but on the morning to travel, I had chicken pox. I couldn't go.
But you've played baseball before as well.
I
don't understand it. I do get softball, which I played for about 2 seconds, but you know.
We should play one day together.
Thank you very much, Mimi. Now, don't forget that you can get in touch with me and some of the team. I'm on Twitter @Okwoche. But for now, from me, Peter Okwoche, and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, that's it. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.